I just want to state that before we start with a lot of these really important numbers, I think if we think about the fact that Native American women have always been kind of seen as a threat, it gives us a context for what we're seeing in the United States today. Like they were the first ones who were dealing with being seen as other on their own land. And that's a legacy that we can't forget when we're talking about these data points. So listen to this and just take note. So it's estimated that every year, 300 Indigenous women and girls go missing in the United States and Canada. And 4 out of 5 Native American women will experience violence in their lifetimes. More than half will survive domestic violence or sexual assault. The CDC reported that in 2016, the third leading cause of death for Native American and Alaskan Native women ages 10 to 24, third leading cause of death is murder. For women 25 to 34, it's the fourth leading cause of death. The National Crime Information Database reports that as of 2016, there were nearly 6,000 missing and murdered Indigenous women. And all of this is fueling the fight for a hashtag that, is just not as mainstream as Me Too. And it's the hashtag MMIWG movement, which stands for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls.
Yeah, but it's not just about the numbers. It's part of the daily life of many Indigenous women in these two countries. The Intercept explains that this is a movement that originated, quote, from the fact that so many Indigenous women knew someone who has died violently or disappeared, and that it identifies the generations-long elimination of thousands of women from Indigenous communities as a direct result of government attempts to eliminate Indigenous culture.
Right. And I guess we have to put it in that context.
Yeah.
Jenny, again, as an Indigenous Native American, help us to understand the bigger picture of this issue and its historical context and why this needs to matter to us now amidst everything that's going on.
Well, I think what's important is that while this issue is generating a lot of interest right now, and I think that's the big takeaway, the high note is that there is finally attention being paid for people like me and Anita and a lot of other people in Indian country. This issue is far from new. In fact, there's a real common understanding among our people that the reality is we hardly know anyone who may not have been touched by violence. And that's how severe this situation is. While the hashtag is about missing and murdered Indigenous women, there's an overarching theme of violence that has just run through our narrative across generations. And I think to really understand this issue, you cannot ignore that kind of trauma on that kind of level.
Right. And it's important, like I said before, that the data, it plays an important role in creating awareness of this epidemic of violence and understanding the issue. And Anita, like Maria said, you've been building the largest database of missing and murdered Indigenous women in the U.S. and Canada. And looking at what you've done, you've been collecting data back since the 1900s. You have a list of nearly 3,000 women. Over half of these cases are of murdered Indigenous women. A third are girls younger than 18 years old.
What is it with the young women?
I know. And it's something important about this data that it isn't public. You say, Anita, that the data is sacred and there are spirits represented within the data. So how did you begin collecting this information? What inspired you to do this? And what is this data showing about this violence that targets Indigenous women?
I started collecting the data when I found that, there are lists online. There are folks who have been working on this. I mean, I'm 27 and this movement has been around my whole life. So as Jenny was saying, this is something that's, run deep through our communities for a long time. So there are resources out there, but none of them match. Most aren't updated frequently. None of them include both Canada and the US. And so I felt like I had a responsibility to fill in that gap. Case in point, last night I was up till 3 a.m. updating the database. There's now over 3,000 cases in it. The number is now 3,032.
Whoa.
Yeah. And why is this so important to you?
For a couple reasons, partially because I'm a survivor of violence myself. I experienced domestic violence that almost killed me, and as well as other forms of violence. And so, if I hadn't been able to survive, I would want my story to have meaning. I would want to be part of the movement to make sure that that kind of violence doesn't happen to other generations of Indigenous women and girls. Beyond that, in terms of, the dedication to it and staying up till 3 a.m., this database has been a labor of love for the last 3 years, and I've been fortunate to get to meet so many families and community members who are just carrying so much grief and yet are also so resilient and so strong in wanting to advocate for their loved ones that, when you're surrounded by that for years, it becomes part of your daily life to be really dedicated to this.